chat your name, your pronouns, and how you connect to the food recovery world so we can all, learn who's on the call and where we might intersect. And now that we have our housekeeping out of the way, let's dive into the presentation, Beyond Good Intentions. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Jennifer Hurd. Until fairly recently, I was with the Chicago Department of Public Health, where I worked on developing policy systems and programs to address chronic diseases. And you might be wondering, why does a health person have any interest in food recovery? But there's dual reasons. Food insecurity and also the environment have a effect on our health. Food recovery has the potential to be a strategy that addresses these dual problems, and it will also improve an individual and the community's health overall too. Because those who are food insecure will have better access to healthier foods. And by developing infrastructure systems to support the food waste recovery ecosystem, this will also create jobs. As we get into the next slide that's up on the screen, you'll see some more details about the three areas that break down that food recovery plays an importance. The social, the environmental, and the economic. I'll let you read those facts for yourself, but they're essential. And the important things that I wanted to highlight was that on average, 46.5 million tons of waste is landfilled in Illinois every year. Food waste accounts for as much as 20% of that, which is more than any other single waste stream found in our landfills. And so it's preventable. And so it's something we can all work together to remediate, to improve our health, build jobs, and move our society forward. We wanted to next get into hunger in the state of Illinois. And some of these data points share with you some of the issues of how hungry our state is in overall. We have over nearly 2 million Illinoisans are facing hunger, including 500,000 children. And this is only going to get worse with the SNAP benefits that are being modified by the current administration. So we can't really count on our charity programs to continuously be supporting these efforts. And we believe that food recovery is an essential strategy to layer into our food insecurity access issues to assist our communities and bring jobs as well. And in our next slide, we'll be moving into sharing our presenters. Each of our presenters are going to introduce themselves and provide the perspective in which they are going to be sharing their role in this ecosystem and how you might be able to engage going forward as well. So let's kick off with Stephanie to introduce herself and then popcorn over to Christine and Jenny. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. I'm Stephanie Katsaros, and I'm an eater, first of all. That's a very important element of the food system, and I'm a mother trying to feed my daughters healthy food, teach them community-minded behavior, and it carries over into the work that I do, the work of Brightbeat. We bring cities and counties together, community organizations, businesses, institutions, large event facilities, lots of different folks who are involved in bringing people together and helping them to adopt and implement circular sustainability strategies is what our business does. But the importance of reducing food loss and expanding food recovery is really where my heart comes into it. And before founding Brightbeat, I worked in radio and concerts and music festivals, and it was the needs and opportunities there that really inspired my current work. So food rescue has been a critical element since 2020 when I really started digging into it with my colleagues here today. And I'd love for you to hear from Christina next.
Thanks, Steph. Good morning, everybody. I'm Christina Siebert. I come to you today from the perspective of local government as well as system planning. SWANK's mission, the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County, is our mission. It is to provide cost-effective and environmentally sound management of waste from our 23 member communities. And while a lot of that waste still goes to the landfill, we're also working hard to divert material, these usable, valuable resources from disposal. In my past life, before working for government, I was a solid waste planner and consultant And I worked on developing, analyzing, and optimizing solid waste systems, doing market assessments and infrastructure studies for all types of material management opportunities. So I'm excited to share more with you today about the important work that SWANK has been involved in with food rescue and working with Stephanie and Jen. And I'll turn it over to Jen.
Forgot how to unmute myself while I'm sharing the screen. Sorry about that. I'm Jen Dowd, and a big passion of mine is connecting folks from different parts of the food system to prevent wasted food, to rescue food, to feed people, and to recycle food scraps into healthy soil nutrients. So I work with Seven Generations Ahead, a 25-year-old organization and nonprofit that works with communities to drive solutions related to climate equity and sustainability. Before my 16 years with Seven Generations Ahead, I worked in public health and really learned how both individual and community health are integrally tied to having access to good, healthy food. Today, I'm going to be talking about collaborations in the food rescue space, as well as some of the connections between food rescue work and policy advocacy.
Okay, now that we've completed our introductions and you understand for the different perspectives we're going to cover over this presentation, we wanted to kick off the presentation with sharing with you who is engaged in food recovery from a policy level and from an operations level, because they are dual roles that are essential. And if I could ask each of our speakers to please share their perspective on this. Steph, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are really a lot of different organizations and businesses who are trying to work in this space, and there's a lot of opportunity for more. This map, it highlights stakeholders and the potential flows of different streams within surplus, but really operationally speaking, who's involved in food recovery, it starts at the generator level over there where it says surplus ingredients, and then you also see a sign for leftover meals. Really, if something's inedible, food retailers, restaurants, institutions, and businesses and venues, food service operators, all the above, they will connect with a hauler, hopefully, to pick up organic waste and deliver it to a processing facility. That's the composting side. That's kind of the easier side. Really, edible food recovery or food rescue, it's all about connections. It's understanding and matching the needs of community, but also with the assets that you have. And the relationships are key. You don't need to try to read the fine print of this map, but there is a QR code if you'd like to really dig into it more. The Illinois Tech Design for Climate Leadership cohort back in 2022 worked with Jennifer Hurd and I, other folks from the city of Chicago, and entities in the city to really look at mapping out what these flows are. Just as an example, the McCormick Place, they generate a lot of surplus food, but they have an organization that's in-house that can break down food and redistribute it for community. They're called Fight to Feed, and they're amazing. There's also organizations that work with when events pop up, like the Chicago Marathon. When that's there, the Chicago Event Management Company works with rescuing leftover cuisine. In the past, the Chicagoland Food Sovereignty Coalition did pickups to help rescue their food. Again, there's a lot of players. If you go to the next slide, I'll share one example and kind of get into the one example. It's collaboration and outcomes. But as I do this, just to get to know each other a little more, if you want to put in the chat another success story you know of, or maybe other organizations you're aware of or think you've heard that they're involved in food recovery, or if you yourself are involved in something. We always are looking for stories to learn from and shout outs. So please do that while I'm talking. And this collaboration I'm going to speak of is a food rescue pilot. We talked about it in 2022 between the City of Chicago, the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, which put on the farmers market, along with the Department of Public Health, got together and said, how could we really ramp up what was happening already with the Urban Canopy, who was on site at Daly Plaza and also at the Bronzeville Farmers Market and others. how could we have them there? They already have their composting buckets, and we're accepting people's compostables to put in there to really engage farmers more. And so through the involvement, the Natural Resources Defense Council is yet another collaborator who supported Brightbeat being involved. But having engagement with the farmers and education and communication on both sides, not only the farmers, but also with the vendors, other vendors, and with the public, we were able to communicate that there was an opportunity to compost, but also an opportunity to distribute and redistribute to community produce that was not going to be sold. So, with that, as you can see here, beginning in 2023, when it actually launched, and that was a pilot that just continued on through the support of the city and these other partners, over 27,000 pounds of fresh produce was distributed. And how this happened is as important as what happened. The Urban Canopy, who was already there on site, helped facilitate bringing. I love all the hearts, but they threw me off for a second. But they were able to capture the produce and bring it back and put it in a space that they rent out to the Chicagoland Food Sovereignty Coalition, which is a group of mutual aid organizations. So Urban Canopy essentially stocked the shelves of mutual aid, and then the next day, and the couple of days after that, they're able to repack and redistribute all of this food. So this is introducing more healthy and healthful options for these, community members in need. But then additionally, the work that Urban Canopy did at the farmers markets included education around how to use these, sometimes to a neighbor, this might be new produce. So these chef demos that we experienced at the Bronzeville Farmers Market, for example, really helped educate on how to use it, along with how and why and what to compost, how to use finished compost, showing the benefits of it. So this type of collaboration really, I think, highlights how you're bringing public and private partners together. That happens, at some facilities, but there's opportunity for much more. And really kind of getting it done on the ground can only happen when there's support from others. So I'll pass it off to Christina. I know some others include government, which you are a part of.
Thanks. So when we think about government and their role, obviously it's in policy creation, it's in implementation and regulation, not always in the most helpful way, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But at the federal level, we see that local government or that government is establishing certain guidance and high-level policy and goals. Where would we like to be as a country with our food reduction, and how are we going to feed people? And probably most importantly, at the federal level is where we get our liability protections and tax benefits that really set the stage for the sustainability and durability and trust that we can put into the food rescue and food recovery networks, and allow us to do the work that we do day in and day out. So donation is the second most preferred action on the US EPA's wasted food scale. But even given that, when we look at this loaf of bread here, 30% of our nation's food supply is surplus. Only about 1/5 of that qualifies as being donatable. And of that portion, only about 10% is actually donated. So in total, we have about 0.7% of our total food supply that represents donated food today, which is like a crouton out of that loaf of bread. We know that we can do better. So when we think about how to do better, we look to the state and local level because we have a lot more connections. So if you go to the next slide. At the state and local level, we are much more closely connected with food waste and the food recovery networks and have more ability to influence their activities. State and local governments provide prescriptive and specific regulations and guidance on food safety. They inspect those food-oriented businesses and connect people to the food sources available. We are seeing an increase at the state and the local level to set policy that diverts food from landfill, largely for climate impacts and for waste reduction efforts. And that means that we're sending more food to compost and anaerobic digestion. Most of our surplus food, 85%, still goes to waste destinations, and most of that is landfills. But we are starting to see more encouragement to send waste to donation or send food to donation. Here at home, the Chicago Climate Action Plan cites food donation as an example of establishing a circular economy. It's one of the 5 pillars for climate action and states that circular solutions focused on reducing, reusing, repairing, and recycling materials can be community designed to address hyperlocal needs and concerns with traditional waste management practices. We know that food donation, food recovery is very much a hyperlocal need. State and local government is typically better equipped than federal government to not only recognize the gaps in local food rescue and distribution systems and the limitations in funding and resources, but they are also in a position to implement programs and policy to enhance or grow systems. We go to the next slide. While we would like to think that there's alignment among the different groups that Stephanie and I have talked about, we know that there's competing priorities. Government policies and regulations play a crucial role to address food waste through those initiatives of setting targets and giving incentives and implementing waste reduction programs, while food rescue initiatives often encounter friction with high-level, well-meaning policies that are aimed at reducing waste alongside those practical on-the-ground realities of redistribution. So while policy aims to reduce disposal and methane emissions and enhance food security, practitioners often face logistical and safety-related bottlenecks that complicate these goals, including food safety to document food that is good versus being able to distribute the food before it isn't good, mandates to divert or donate versus funding and infrastructure to make it happen, policy focused on reducing waste versus the need to feed people healthy and balanced foods, and paperwork and more paperwork versus moving food where and when it needs to be. So policy typically comes from a place of good intention and public benefit, but it has a way of getting mired in the minutia. So I'd like to take for you to take a moment and share an example in the chat of how government or policy has gotten in the way of food recovery or donation in your experience.
So as you complete that chat, we'll continue the presentation. We started the conversation off with asking the question, who is currently engaged in food recovery from both an advocacy and policy perspective and operations level as well. And then now we'd like to pivot and have Jen Dowd share with you examples of collaboration among these various organizations, businesses, and community organizations. So Jen, if you could please take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. So in addition to all the individual stakeholders, whether they're businesses, government, people, everyone who's involved in this, we really need to think about what connects the dots, the conversations across the food system. And so what I'm going to do is talk about convenings that are bringing together different parts of the food system to do just that. From national groups like the Zero Food Waste Coalition and RED and Stephanie, the Natural Resources Defense Council, to state ones looking at Feeding Illinois and their farm to food bank programs and capacity building grants, to Illinois Environmental Council advocating for food system policy, to the Illinois Food System Infrastructure Collaborative, and so many more. Local and regional groups are throughout our state, and we've got the Heart of Illinois Harvest, the Chicago and Food Sovereignty Coalition that Steph also mentioned earlier, CIFPAC hosting our summit today, and the Cross Community Climate Collaborative. There is no way I could possibly find enough room on a slide to represent all of the different collaborative conversations that are happening. This is just a snapshot of what's out there. And I think what's really important to think about is that these collaborations broaden conversations and they bring different food system stakeholders into the same room. And these ongoing conversations help to build relationships and inspire new ways of thinking about how to address challenges in our food system. So as I mentioned, countless other groups. I have another ask for you in the chat. If you know of any other groups that are convening these kinds of conversations, either in Illinois or on a local or regional level, and they're not listed on the slide, drop them into the chat. I mean, these are all every time I have a conversation with somebody, I'm learning about a new group that is working on trying to more effectively rescue food and get food to feed people. I have to advance my own slide now. Two of the groups that I really want to talk to you about now are ones that work hand in hand. And I'll start with just sharing that the story of Illinois efforts to reduce food waste and expand composting begins with commitment and collaboration. And in 2012, there were stakeholder conversations that led to the founding of the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition. And from its beginning, it focused on aligning composting policy, infrastructure, and education. And before the IFSCC, residential food scrap collection was virtually non-existent in Illinois. We saw examples of it in other states, but did not have it here. Today, Illinois has scaled from like 2 pilot programs in 2012 to over 100 programs. This is municipalities that are offering their residents the opportunity to have their food scraps collected for compost. That means over 900,000 residents in Illinois have access to this service, and they have the power to keep their food scraps out of the landfill, but many of them don't know it's there. And that's a really, really strong example of how we've got the infrastructure, we've got the policy, we need the education for this specific piece of it. In 2017, the Wasted Food Action Alliance was founded, and as a close collaborator with IFSCC, but really focusing on the food waste prevention and food rescue portions of the US EPA wasted food scale. Wasted Food Action Alliance adopted a multi-stakeholder approach, bringing together food businesses, policymakers, solid waste agencies, and environmental and hunger organizations. And this collaboration leverages unique perspectives and expertise to reduce waste across the entire food supply chain. Wasted Food Action Alliance connects growers, rescuers, and recyclers to ensure that Illinois leads the nation in food stewardship. IFSCC and WFAA, along with many food system advocates, professionals, and organizations across Illinois, continue to increase connectivity and create circularity to help both people and nature thrive. Together, these coalitions really exemplify how diverse groups in Illinois are working together to strengthen food waste reduction, food rescue, and food scrap recycling efforts. I'm just going to do a quick shout out. The top photo on here is 4 Wasted Food Action Alliance members at a previous SIFPAC conference. One of us is nonprofit, we have a food bank, we have a consulting firm, and we have a business, a local business, all of us in conversation together. And the photo on the bottom is at a national refed conference, and we have ISTC and US EPA in the house, as well as Wasted Food Action Alliance. So just giving you a taste of the different conversations that happen when you're coming in the same room. Wasted Food Action Alliance has convened many food system conversations around collaborative funding opportunities, around food system asset mapping, food rescue coordination, and supported the local work done to conduct a Chicago food rescue assessment that was done in partnership with the cross-departmental city team and the Natural Resources Defense Council and Brightbeat. And I'll turn it over to you, Jennifer, to tell us a little bit more about that.
So thank you, Jen. Just to reframe and level set everybody again, we've introduced the problem with you at the beginning of the presentation. We've given you an understanding of the food recovery players and what the core collaborations currently exists. And then so you might be asking yourself, well, what's the issue? Why isn't this problem solved? And this diagram or picture demonstrates the issues that are at hand, both the barriers and the opportunities. This was developed with IIT, the Illinois Tech Design for Climate Leadership, in the spring of 2022, as noted, but by a great former colleague, Ezra Sungu. uh, where we convened a group of stakeholders, such as all of you on this call, to really identify what were the issues and then how we were going to work to overcome them. It's a, it's a, it takes a village and it takes layering and years to make these changes. Um, as you can see, the barriers are vast, which makes the issue very complicated. But there's also opportunities that were identified as well, such as changing of mindsets, addressing the rules and regulations, having more collaboration, coordination with the community, co-designing with the community, and then developing a roadmap and having accountability built in for all parties. The big barrier to a lot of this, I'll be honest with you, is the resources that it takes to get this off the ground. To make a systems change, you need a lot of resources. But I think we're on the right trajectory. The one main thing we did learn from the food rescue assessment is that due to the large system changes that are required to address this issue, it might be better to explore a more regional or a statewide policy approach rather than a local approach, because then more resources often become available from either the county or the state. And so that's what's being explored with our colleagues at with Swank. And so if we can move to the next slide. So we wanted to ask you, is there anything you are doing to align policy and practice? As you put your responses in the chat, we'll start moving into Christina, who leads the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County, and she'll be sharing how she is working with the Illinois Department of Environment to delve into food recovery from a larger regional perspective and taking the next steps to align policy and practice. Christine, please take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. So just over 2 years ago at a Wasted Food Action Alliance collaboration discussion about funding and bringing items together for food rescue and food systems, Stephanie and I got to discussing issues around food recovery funding, the need to bring about collaboration, and we approached the Illinois EPA's materials management section lead at the time, now the IEPA director, James Jennings, to explore what the state might be thinking within the space of food recovery. And again, thinking, like Jennifer mentioned, about a broader region or the state level, not just at a local municipal level. At the heart of the issue was our need for real, comprehensive, consolidated data, documentation of the existing network, a clear identification of the barriers to making it more robust and sustaining, and the vision and position to make it happen. Illinois EPA was immediately a willing partner with interest in what we could bring to light, and through multiple discussions, we fine-tuned a study, which we now refer to as the Food Recovery Infrastructure Assessment, or FRIA. That study has been funded by the Illinois EPA through an intergovernmental agreement with SWANK, with the actual work of the assessment and the big lift being completed by Brightbeat. We have a few pieces to finish, but look for that full study to be shared by this summer. This partnership and collaboration has brought together an incredible amount of information, energy, and engagement over the past year, including with many of you that are listening to this today. And I hope the next few slides resonate with you, because you may have heard them already earlier this week at a convening that we had on this project. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to have her share what has been learned.
Thank you all. And, we want to hear from you more than we want to hear from me, but I'll quickly kind of take you through the learnings, because it is important. And this first slide lets you understand, get a glimpse into the breadth of outreach that we did over the last year. Over 750 businesses were contacted via email, walking in the door, dropping off a flyer. We had over 250 respond to our outreach, which was pretty good odds. And then we had these in-person visits or tours where if we, I'll talk about the survey responses we received, but we were in person at a business and they were sharing out why they can't donate, why they're afraid to do so, or their approach to minimizing food waste, or what we saw behind the scenes in their compost bins. All the above were really valuable takeaways, and we had 41 of the locations that we engaged with respond to the surveys. You can see the sectors that are represented. It's here on the slide. But again, we were really looking at the largest of food generators as well as the two kind of outlets for them, be it food recovery and donation or organic waste recycling, which is largely composting. We do have an anaerobic digester, Green Era, here in Chicago. So we were looking at those two outlets, and the collection period for this information was last year, April to September. So we can go to the next slide. So, by the survey data, the infrastructure mapping, and the direct engagement with these key sectors, we found the most common barriers we heard being training and operational costs due to time constraints and staffing limitations. All sectors on the donation side are reporting the need for storage, and sadly, there's not a lot of education that's happening within these businesses. So these explain the gap between the surplus that's available and the surplus that's actually being recovered. And on the next slide, we'll give you a little insight into what we found to be donation activity. On average, grocery stores are donating over 1,000 pounds per week, but restaurants are a much smaller weekly average. Special events, exponentially more, but those events aren't necessarily consistent. So those volumes aren't coming, and the recipients of those food can't consistently rely on them. So that's just sort of insight into some of the sectors, but it's important to note at the bottom the research that was conducted by DePaul University. At the time of their research into really looking at open grocery stores, this was towards, kind of a year into COVID, understanding what was open and what was available to communities that needed food. Fewer than half of the grocery stores that they interacted with had active donation partnerships. We'd like to believe that that's changed, but sit with that. If half the grocery stores in the city, in the region, are not connected and are not donating food, quite frankly, every single day, that is the scale of food that's going to waste. And this doesn't indicate unwillingness. What it reflects is that there's variations in awareness of how to donate, infrastructure to donate, and connections to partners. So you can go to the next slide. In terms of the infrastructure of those recipients, we heard from food banks across the state that donation volume really varies by region. So just in Northern Cook County, that's what this data represents, we were hearing that about 5,000 pounds per week was being rescued per pantry. So that was some effort being done on their side to either go and get it or receive it. This constitutes between 15 and 33% of the food that they acquire. So they also have storage space to receive more. When we've done walkthroughs at pantries, a lot of times there's too much space. There's too much space not filled with food, and it really shows the need. On the plus side, there's a lot of collaboration between pantries and recovery partners. It's the lack, or I should say, constraints from volunteers and transportation, and really the right timing. Food might be available at 10 o'clock after a big concert or a big, basketball game, but that might not be the time that the volunteers are available. So these are the issues that maybe constrain or affect the recovery infrastructure. And the amount of surplus, this is kind of a key point, and I'm stumbling on my words, but recovery capacity isn't infinite, and the amount of surplus food that we're trying to capture is staggering. So, next slide. This is a highlight of just 5 of the communities that we researched. There are 23 municipalities in Swank, and then there's 5 priority communities in the city of Chicago that we looked at. And so that you can actually read the slide, we've shown 5 here. And what you can see is tens of thousands of pounds of weekly surplus food is estimated per community in our study area per week. This reflects just 2 of the study sectors, restaurants and food service. Food service includes food service operation at schools, just to make that clear, as well as the grocery store and mixed retail side. The way we got this data is using the US EPA Excess Food Opportunities Map. It was updated in September of 2025, and they look at different business types and identify what quantities of food they estimate to be surplus. Restaurants and food service operations represent 20,000 to over 75,000 pounds of potentially rescued food per community in these communities. And not all communities have grocery stores, but those that do, they're ranging from hundreds of pounds to 50,000 pounds or more of surplus food generated each week by this sector. So you can go to the next slide. To summarize our findings, overall, they shed light on current practices and really the conditions under which the food donation and recovery operate today. So this is just the reality. We're seeing that there's large volumes of edible surplus not being rescued. There's not a lot of awareness around the tax incentives to benefit the businesses if they do donate. And, Amy O'Rourke and others were sharing in the chat liability concerns that persist. People don't know, those that work in the business are concerned around liability, and that really prevents more rescue. And lastly, food recovery requires coordination and capacity, not just surplus food. I'm going to pass it on over.
Okay, so back to me, Jennifer. So as you can see from our previous speakers and the free assessment most recently, through their deeper dive, that there clearly are gaps and challenges with scaling up food recovery statewide, and locally, regionally. So we wanted to ask all of you, what do you feel we need to do to address these gaps and challenges? I'm not monitoring the chat, so maybe you have already introduced some of these topics in the chat, but if you could think of others after hearing some of the items that were identified by Stephanie through the free assessment, we would welcome those in the chat. And as you're adding your suggestions to the chat, Steph will begin to share the resources, the pilots, and the actions that are currently taking place or being developed to educate individuals, businesses, and policymakers. Just on some of those things that she noted in her last summary slide are the issues of the legal, the tax incentives, maybe if businesses knew more, if we had training tools to provide to them. She'll share some of those items that she's developing with partners. And then Jen will then segue over to sharing the current existing policy and also some current existing policy and then policy that is also being developed currently in the Illinois General Assembly. So I'll start with Stephanie to take it from here. Thanks.
You're welcome. And so kind of jumping back into the next step after our research is we really saw that it was important to bring stakeholders together. So as mentioned before, Christina talked about the Wasted Food Action Alliance event at which we sort of hatched the idea for the FRIA. We brought two convenings of stakeholders together, one in October at the Swank offices and one just this past Tuesday at the Hatchery in Garfield Park. We wanted to share the findings that we've shared with you today, to see and hear feedback, and then also to learn if it reflected the experiences of these stakeholders, and to listen to the conversations, to have the findings of these conversations shared out amongst the crowd to better understand the needs to support system change, greater recovery. And we heard that food businesses and food recovery organizations are really looking for connections. They want to know who to contact and who to reach out to and build partnerships with. We really had to adjust the way we ran our forums themselves because there was so much interest in talking to each other. Just these folks aren't all in the room together. We kind of doubled the amount of time we had just for networking. And I bring that up because, tomorrow at the Is tomorrow Thursday? Tomorrow's Friday. At the Food Justice Summit, we're going to be in person together. And then also we felt and learned that there was a lot more of resources needed for this education that we're talking about. So we've designed some tools. They're still being finalized here, but really the food donation guidelines that need to be put out to restaurants, not only understanding the why and the how to prepare safe food for donation, but also addressing those liability concerns. Additionally, we created a directory for food recovery infrastructure that has lists of food tech partners, recovery and rescue partners, but also recipient partners. And so these tools are being made available directly in relation to what we heard from organizations. And that's the tools. So I'm going to pass it back.
Well, there's one more piece that's coming out of FRIA that we are really turning our attention to now with all the learning that we've had. We know there's a surplus of edible food that's available in the region. We know there are organizations that exist who know how to manage that surplus. And we know that there's way too many hungry people who can benefit from it. So how do we connect those dots? We are going to be working to develop and outline a demonstration project that will build on the learnings about the existing infrastructure, the needs of the food recovery system within the study region. And we're going to measure the impact of filling the gaps in areas like collection and transportation, food storage, repackaging, and distribution. The demonstration project plan is going to include bounding the demonstration area. So we'll have a geography that it's going to be contained within. It will define the specific gaps that exist within that geography and develop the plan to fill them. And then it'll quantify the funding that's needed to execute it. By testing a more robust and coordinated system, we hope to create a demonstrated model that can be replicated anywhere, greatly enhancing food recovery networks that are serving Chicago, its suburbs, the state, and beyond. After we develop the plan for the demonstration project, we'll be working to track down funding to implement it, and we'll be eager to share the knowledge that's gained through the project and maybe even have that to share this time next year. One quick tease that I want to share and confirmation that at the state level, the Illinois EPA is not just looking at this at a study level. We learned just this week from Director Jennings that the IEPA is going to be posting a notice of funding opportunity for $2 million in grant funding towards food recovery and management. We don't have a specific date on that, but it's coming soon. Watch the IEPA website, watch your networks that you connect with, because I'm sure everyone will be sharing it out widely as soon as there's knowledge of that funding opportunity and being able to secure those grants. So we are not doing this just for this project. It is really something that the state is putting some effort behind and direct funding to be able to advance us.
Jen Dowd is now going to share with you some of the areas with respect to state policy in the state of Illinois that are currently existing and are also in development. Jen, take it away.
Thank you. Looking at, like, we started today going over challenges with wasted food and hunger here in Illinois. We shared some of the key players. You've listened to each of us talk about and share examples of the interconnectedness of the food system and the value of working together to shape a more equitable system. I'm going to talk a little bit right now about policy and advocacy and how they play a key role in addressing food waste and hunger in Illinois. So state level policies meet specific local needs that federal laws can't cover. Christina talked earlier about some of the challenges that where you've got what's happening in policy and what's happening boots on the ground, and where there are some of those conflicts. But the other thing to note, and Christina mentioned it earlier too, is that federal policy is the backbone, but then at the state level, we want to be looking at policy that meets specific local needs that the federal laws can't cover. The National Institute of Health wrote that state level food system policies are essential to create resilient, equitable, and sustainable food environments that address specific local needs, which federal policies cannot cover. They enable states to strengthen local economies, protect farmland from development, improve public health through better access to nutritious food, and ensure food safety standards. So how do we make sure this happens? We've been talking about it the whole time, like collaboration is needed to leverage policy and funding to support food rescue partners. These efforts really can and do make a difference. And this slide shares a few recent food system policies in Illinois that have been enacted that support food waste reduction and food rescue. There are many more over the past years, but I did want to highlight these couple. We have policy that was enacted in 2021 that requires schools to have an unused food share plan built within their local wellness policy. What's interesting is I heard there's actually an amendment being proposed to the language of that bill that would actually put school share tables and put those words into this policy if that makes it through. So that's something that people are working on this year. And if any of you have worked with policy, you know that language matters. The words that are in the policy really do matter. And so you might ask, why do we care about adding these? We do because that's actually going to make it easier for schools in Illinois to have share tables. In 2022, there was a policy enacted that removed the school's low bid requirement. And Roger from CIFPAC talked about this, and it was talked about in a session yesterday. So if you want to learn more, I would encourage you to watch that session. But basically, schools used to have to take the lowest bid for food, and this one allowed them to factor in other things that would be, whether it was local food, healthy food, or it removed a barrier to schools. And then in 2024, the large event facility recycling bill was passed that requires large event venues to have recycling and composting. And many of these venues will also incorporate food donation when they're looking at building these systems in. Cook County also passed a large event facility waste diversion ordinance that aligns with that. If you want to look at other inactive food scrap related legislation, the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition maintains a list on the website. And when you get the access to this deck, I've put a link in here for that. On to the fun about where we are today. Feed and Conserve Illinois is a coalition that was formed in early 2025, and 3 simple goals: feed people, feed animals, and compost food scraps. And Senator Adrienne Johnson from the 30th District introduced Senate Bill 2852 to help Illinois create a more resilient, economically sound, and environmentally responsible food system. You heard from Jennifer, Steph, and Christina about what the food recovery assessments have identified. Surplus food exists while there is a growing need and growing levels of hunger in our state. Grocery stores offer a big opportunity, and infrastructure is needed to support the rescue of this food. Senate Bill 2852, the Food Recovery and Diversion Bill, offers a pragmatic and cost-conscious pathway forward. It establishes a clear framework to divert millions of pounds of food every year for human and animal consumption, and it significantly reduces the amount of methane produced by landfills in Illinois. We know that states that have implemented similar laws have seen food recovery organizations receive an influx of donations. And so we've added provisions to this Senate bill to help protect food recovery organizations. For example, the right to refuse a donation and other things that look at the wording of the law to make sure that we are building in support for this increased amount of donations. The QR code on this slide lets you go to the Feed and Conserve Illinois website, and you can sign up to get updates in the future as well. One final thing I would just say is that getting connected and taking policy action can happen in many different ways, whether you sign up for that list and get updates that are coming, or you support state and local resolutions. There are ways that each of us can take action and make a difference. work together, have these conversations like we're having today, advocate for change that makes sense here in Chicago and in Illinois, and then leverage policy to support growers, food rescue partners, and our neighbors. And I would think we're good for that. Jen, back to you. Jennifer.
So we just wanted to thank you all for attending our session today and actively engaging in the chat. I did have a chance to flip over to it while others were talking, and there's a lot of good recommendations going on in there that we really appreciate, and we'll probably do some follow-ups, and then you can always follow up with us. I'm not sure, I don't think we have a slide with our contact information, but if you contact us in the chat that you'd like to reach out to us, please let us know. We will definitely communicate back to you. We thank you for joining us today. We encourage you to take action, and we appreciate your time and effort. And I'll just open the conversation to the three other speakers on this call if you want to close with any final remarks.
Well, I'll just jump in and say, as a unit of government, we take a lot of pride and responsibility for making sure that information for our member communities within SWANK and for the residents across our business and businesses across our membership have good information to be able to make decisions from. And that includes obviously within the food rescue space. So developing clear and simple guidelines so that we have support to answer the concerns about liability and to bring confidence to the network and to be a connector and a collaborator with our constituents is very important to us. This is a really important step for us to get all of the folks on this call, and they have come out to other convenings together and hear the diverse perspectives. This isn't something that any one entity is going to solve or come up with a rock solid approach to. We all need to work together on it. So appreciate everybody's time.
Well, I wanted to make sure that we open the floor for questions. I know there's some that have been facilitated already into the conversation, and some of you have been answering questions already as they have come through. But if folks want to come off mute and ask questions, and while that happens, I'm going to remind you before we have most people coming, having to take off for their next commitment. We're going to launch a poll at the end in a few minutes. So be watchful for that. We appreciate your feedback for this session. And with that, I'm going to open up the room for 3 questions at least. We will be finished at 11:15, so we have some time.
I noticed
I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Jen.
I'll jump in really quickly because there was a question in the chat about the session that I mentioned, talking about policy change. And that was the building power together, you and me, and shaping food and farm policy. That was yesterday at 11:45. Trying to see if there are other.
And I'll say there was a question about Senate Bill 2852 and what specifically it would do. If you could explain that in a little more detail, Jen.
Well, it's a pretty long bill. So to give it to you in just the quick and dirty overview, it really looks at establishing guidelines for making sure that we're reducing wasted food, rescuing food to feed people, and then composting, sort of looking at that wasted food scale, and put in place over a course of years certain sizes of food generators that are required to comply with the bill. So if we're talking about composting, If you're a really, really large food scrap generator, the first year you might be involved in the bill, and it's going to be scaled over the course of years to get more and more people involved. There's also a lot of discussions about how this is going to be managed as a statewide policy and recognizing that there are really big differences in infrastructure. So different counties will be impacted by this policy in different ways based on how many people they have in the county. There's a great fact sheet on the Feed and Conserve website that goes through all of the details of this bill, and also there's some on the website, they share some of the changes that have come out of stakeholder discussions that have happened in the last year, because there was a similar bill proposed last year that ran out of time and didn't make it through. And so since then, we've had conversations with all different stakeholder groups to try and determine what could make this a stronger and more impactful bill.
Anybody else? I know the content was rich, but
Yeah, there was one other question that was in the chat. How are school share tables defined? And provide some familiarity about what those are.
Well, I did tell you words are important. And so I'm not the expert on the words that are used for share tables, but I'll give you the big picture, which is that in a lunchroom, when students are done eating, the goal is to have a place where uneaten food that is still safe to be recaptured can be recaptured and either donated to people, or it can be brought back into the kitchen and used again, certain foods. So Stephanie showed a picture of earlier on in the presentation of a bunch of children cooking around a table. And that was actually her daughter's school. And they were taking food that had been rescued and being able to learn how to prepare food for the community there. So the share table is that piece of it. One of the things to know is that there are protections for donating like that. And school food is actually paid for by the USDA. And so there's guidance that comes down from the USDA that says it's okay to rescue school meal food. And it's okay for the school to bring it back and use it again if they want to. And then the Illinois State Board of Education has similar language saying that this is okay as well. Drop in, there is an upcoming webinar being done on school food policy and share tables. The 7 Generations Ahead is hosting, and I'll drop a link in the chat to that.
I think Amy O'Rourke already beat you to it, as well as providing some resources from the Illinois Extension for share table planning.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy.
And I think it's just such an interesting point, you know, when I've talked to schools and not, you know, schools on different levels, the volunteers as well as the principal and the food service operators, they need kind of written down in black and white that they're allowed to do something before they sometimes will do it. So it's this idea that the Good Samaritan Act, you know, we just gave a whole, in our forum, we gave a whole presentation on safe food handling and safe food donation. It's already protected. If you in good faith donate food, you are not held liable. But we still have to like write that in to policy that already exists. The policy is already there, but it like we need to double and triple and quadruple down on the awareness of things. So I'm just the policy language thing. I just had to bring up the fact that it is important to bring up, and it is important to raise it as a priority.
I don't see any questions we haven't answered in the chat. We still have a little bit of time if those that are on the line want to pop in a question.
Or share a
You might
success
even-
story.
Or I think you might even be able to unmute yourself and ask your question live.
exactly. You can unmute yourself if you wanna, if you're able to, if your space allows it. Please come off mute with your question.
Can we get a copy of your slide presentation?
Does CIFPAC share it automatically? I mean, the answer is yes, that our materials are available. I just need to know whether that gets shared.
Yeah, and I can check back with the team about specifically the presentation, but the actual recording will be accessible through the WebEx app. And it will be also available in a few weeks on YouTube. So I'll have to check back on the actual materials. I don't know if there's anybody from my team here that may have that answer that's on the call, but
Yeah, we put a number of links in the presentation, so helpful if that can be shared
yeah.
too.
I would ask the presenters if you're comfortable with folks reaching out to you. You can just put your email addresses on the chat. That would be great, or an email address if they want to reach out for more questions.
Yep, I believe
as
that
well.
Stephanie and I both have ours in there already. And Jen just put hers in. There's another question that did just come up. As the FRIA study is wrapping up, do you have any ideas on how it could be applied or translated to other areas across the country or world? One of the things that I would say about this, and then I'll ask Stephanie if she has anything to add, is there was a really robust surveying effort that was undertaken for this. And it went through a few different iterations in order to be workable for folks to provide responses that were useful and comprehensive. And so we've got a long version, we have a shorter version. All of that's going to be part of the study documentation as well as the analysis and learnings from this. So if there are lessons learned that will emerge from this that are ways to continue to peel this onion back, that will be part of that analysis as well. So it's a good starting point for anyone who wants to pick it up for their region to look at a deeper level what all of the interconnected components of existing food rescue and food recovery are within your region, and then take those ideas and find ways to fill the gaps. Again, there's no cookie cutter approach to this. This is really going to be dependent on the energy, the motivation, the funding, the policy, the entities that are available within your region to support. But as we get more and more information, I really view this as something, I don't want to use the word commercialized because I don't think this is really a capital driven effort, but it's a social need. But if we can make it look more like business and function more like business, it will sustain more like business and achieve a lot of great goals. So anything that I missed on that, Stephanie, about how we can translate this into other parts of the US across the world?
No, I mean, what you said was great and on point. The only thing I would add, and it's because you said commercialize, that there's a lot of good work happening. And what we learned through our study and through just the work that a lot of us have been doing this for years, and Jen Dowd and I can both say that it's hard to reach out to a grocery store and find out if they donate or not. I mean, that's why Howard, if you saw Dr. Howard Rosing in the chat, gave his email address if you want to reach out to him at DePaul University about sharing these positive stories that grocery stores have that of work they're already doing. But it's this fact that the good actors don't necessarily show off about it, because you know what, that's not why they're doing it. And so the more that we can share and highlight good practices, the more we can inspire others, the more we can have more studies done, and honestly, the more that we can inform the policy to get, as the core of this presentation was focused on, we can get beyond the idea of a policy to a functioning policy, to an impactful policy. So I hope that this, not only the study that we did, but just activating the conversation, will have ripples not only in Illinois as this study is replicated, but also industry wide, as we're trying to target these sectors and say, what are you doing? If you're doing it, great, let's hear about it. If you're not doing it, you need to do more.
Well, with that, we're going to thank our presenters today. Thank you again for joining us. I'm going to launch a feedback poll. It should appear on your screen shortly. And if it doesn't, look for a red notification near the chat.